Welcome to the 419. I'm Kevin Mullen, alongside my co-hosts Gretchen DeBacker and Matt Killam. The 419 is brought to you in part by Witro Wealth Management. With nearly 35 years of experience in financial planning, investment planning, insurance planning, and tax planning, Tim Witro and his experienced team of advisors at Witro Wealth Management have applied their expertise toward helping you. They will customize a financial plan geared towards you, establishing attainable goals that they will help you reach. In turn, you rest assured knowing you're in experienced hands, giving you peace of mind about your financial future. Tim and his team will truly care about you and your needs. And we know they care about the community. That's why they support the 419. Learn more at WitroAdvisors.com. And now, here's the 419.
Witty repartee.
Let's do it.
In 3, 2.
I mean, we can start right with my guest.
You know what
Matt.
we could start with? Silence your phones.
Well, I wanted my guest to feel welcome. And
If you have candy, we recommend you unwrap it now.
Unless you're going to ASMR it.
Okay. What does that even stand for?
she doesn't know.
Something about sensory.
Yeah, good.
I think this might actually be episode 10.
Okay, episode
Okay.
10, lucky number 10.
Lucky number 10.
Maybe.
Is 10 lucky? I didn't realize. But anyway,
So I'm going to give you some hints and you guys guess. It is my turn. It is my guest. I have a special guest.
Oh, boy.
I don't know that either one of you are going to guess it for a couple of reasons. One, well, all based on your powers of deduction. But I'm really excited. This is a dear friend who, okay. I'm very proud to sneak this onto our calendars. Here are some hints. This individual is bi-coastal. If you consider the Atlantic Ocean and Lake Erie the coast, which I do.
I do as well.
So
Mostly because I don't know.
Sandusky and Detroit.
That's right.
I don't know where either one of them are.
That's right.
So
All right,
that's
they
fine.
are in, to some degree, the family business. They are a leader of both hearts and minds. So I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't waste their time with the two of you. So without further ado, you're
I'm
not
so
going
excited.
to guess it.
Okay, we're not gonna
my
guess
dear
it.
friend and friend to our area, Imam,
No way.
come around the corner. Matt Deeb, there he is.
Imam Deeb.
Hey, how
have
are
a
ya?
seat. So I don't know that all of you have met. In case you haven't, Kevin Mullen, Gretchen DeBacker.
Pleasure to meet you.
So I was doing a little backtracking, trying to remember where we first met. I think that we met out of the Treehouse Village, and we spent some time together with a large group, and I was particularly taken with you in a number of ways, and we just sort of grew a friendship. And
I wowed him with my jokes.
Okay.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's
that's
right.
what it was.
That's
Just
one way
one
to get.
joke.
That's one way to get to
Yeah.
it.
I'll take one joke.
What? Tell us the joke now.
Oh,
and
save
we'll
it to
tell
the
you.
end. Yeah,
No,
save it
it's
to the
too good.
Yeah,
I can't even share
just be
it.
sprinkling it around. So there's a
reuse it.
really interesting history here, and I think that you are our youngest guest, if you can imagine that.
wow.
So
Depends on how old you think I am.
29.
No.
49.
Okay, I mean,
Somewhere
pretty
in between.
wild jump.
yeah, she's not our strongest mathematician. That's important. Important to say.
I heard you talking about deduction skills
Yeah,
before.
that's very
Yeah,
generous.
it's a problem. It's a real problem.
31. Close.
Okay.
Very
So-
close. Yeah.
Still.
Yes,
Still the youngest. Wow.
absolutely.
Honored.
Well, as are we. So again, grew up in or born in Florida.
Born in Orlando. Well, born in Damascus,
Okay.
Syria, and then my father decided to immigrate, and my parents decided to leave. Not really because of seeking economic prosperity in America. My father was doing quite well in Damascus. He was a very famous reciter of Quran, so he was like a singer, and because we recite Quran almost in melodious singing. And so, and he was also an imam. So I think his teacher and mentor told him, the best thing that you can do for the world is learn English and go serve people in America. And he
Wow.
just took that to heart.
Yeah.
And so we moved, my father and mother and us, we immigrated when I was about almost 5 years old. We landed in Queens, New York. Father hated it. It took
Yeah,
him a few
sure.
months
Yeah.
to be like, this is not where I want to raise my kids.
Yeah.
And then, they ended up in
Now,
Orlando.
you've got a sister I know. I want to get to her, but
Sure.
tell me, is it just you and she, or you have other brothers and
I have
sisters?
3 sisters.
Okay. All
One
right.
older, 2 younger.
That's
Okay.
why he's so nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
When
well,
you have all sisters.
I have three brothers, so
See,
that's what you're
point
saying.
made.
I'm also
Point
so I
made.
don't know what that means based on it. So you go from Queens to Florida.
Right.
How did, and I do want to talk about your dad at some point because I know, and for good reason, you're very proud of him.
Yes.
Even on your materials, you hand over, I think, what I would describe as pretty significant accomplishments for a person
Right.
your age to his.
Definitely.
So I do want to get to him, but if you don't mind kind of walking us through
Sure.
Queens to Orlando, Florida,
Yeah.
isn't necessarily intuitive. Why did he pick there?
Well, I mean, he knew a friend in Orlando who was also an imam and a business person. And so he invited him. They were both from Syria. Went to Orlando, never left. He liked it. So I ended up, growing up as a, almost Puerto Rican.
Sure, yeah. And Americans don't delineate anyway, so there's
exactly.
yeah, you're brown, you have brown eyes.
Yeah,
Must be,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, there's a line. You're either on one side or the other. So
Yeah.
it's, white
That's
or
right.
not white.
Yeah, exactly.
And we are sticking to that. We have not progressed.
Especially in Florida.
Yeah, that's right.
Wait, what? Was
We
that
don't have
wrong?
a lot of Florida downloads, so you can say whatever you want.
Well, Florida is really interesting because like the more north you get, the more south it gets.
100%.
In terms of like culture and
I lived there for
ethnic
2
makeup.
years. I lived there for 2 years, and when people think of Florida, I think they think of Miami,
Yeah.
Fort Lauderdale, or Orlando. And the reality is that Florida is a more linear Texas.
Very much so. More linear Texas. Sorry,
Yeah.
that's
I don't
actually
know that-
quite
And I don't mean
brilliant.
that in terms of
I've
thought.
never heard of that.
I don't know
Because
that
of that,
that's
he
on
said
the
I was
state
going-
flag.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's what Florida,
Yeah.
a more
In
linear
fairness,
Texas.
In fairness, you've never seen the state flag.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Hey, that might be a point of pride for them now.
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh, 100%.
Texas is trying to split, so
Yes.
I'm pretty sure Florida is the next state
Yeah,
that's going
they're
to
right
consider
with them.
that.
They're like, this is not a bad idea.
Yeah. Wait, that's an option?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Cut it off right now.
So you grew up, went through high school there. Talk to me about what that high school experience was like. And,
Sure.
and compared to these old fogies on either side of you, I do want to talk about the calling to work but you have a calling. And like anything else, right, there has to be not necessarily pressure, but you want to honor your parents, and something is telling you to do this, right?
Right.
And the push and pull between, other interests or other things that kids in your neighborhood are doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'm going to start with you as a
Yes.
kid, right? So with sort of the shadow of your dad and
Right.
his role in the community, and so what it was like being
The
his
son of a-
son.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think about
Yeah.
the stories of the pastor's kid, and
Sure.
so it's. I think there's a lot of responsibility and respect to that role. Did that provide
Right.
additional pressure on you to not? You can't
be an
screw
angel?
up. Yeah, yeah, you got to be perfect.
Yeah, well, I was an angel. No, I'm
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So before I answer, I'm curious. What is the common kind of stereotype of the pastor's kid?
So to me, I think the pastor's family is expected to behave in a certain manner.
Right.
There is undue pressure to behave and follow, I would think, the pillars or principles of whatever's being said at the pulpit every Sunday.
Have you ever seen the movie Footloose?
A very long time ago. Yeah.
That's the other sort of stereotype, is this
Yeah.
expectation. But
Yeah.
then the reality is like this rebel, going against what the preacher or the pastor or whatever would
Yes.
say. And everyone sort of knows that person, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, a high bar that nobody can reach.
Right.
Sure.
Right. But I think also this expectation that the kid is going to be perfect, right? And so the pastor and the pastor's family is a better parent than the regular parent, and so
And
of
you're the
course-
only boy. So
Yes.
there has to be some
Added expectations.
baked into the formula of that.
Yeah. I ask because it's exactly the same in the Muslim community. These are the same kind of stereotypes, the same expectations and realities, and I don't think it happens. It doesn't happen on purpose, and I don't think a lot of the times it actually happens with the awareness of the father, or
That's
if
fair.
it's a female pastor, like the mother, but the community kind of places those pressures, and they many a times don't realize, but they're like expecting so much.
And
They-
you are on stage.
Yes.
Right? Sure.
Yes, you're on stage
All the time.
all the time,
Right.
and so but maybe I had a different. So I'll do my life story in 5 minutes. We moved to Orlando. I went to public school. Immediate kind of culture shock because I'm still like adjusting to what is America,
Right.
What is this, and I'll tell you a funny story. When we arrived and I got admitted into public school, still elementary, I had a tutor for English, and she was Lebanese.
Okay.
So she spoke Arabic. And, that first day of school, I go back to my mom, like, shocked and in panic, because I'm like, she doesn't wear hijab.
Yeah.
And it's the first time in my life
Wow.
that I'm seeing, like, a woman,
Right.
much less someone who spoke Arabic, that doesn't kind of wear the headscarf.
Sure.
Because in Damascene kind of culture, you have people who don't wear the headscarf in certain areas of Damascus, and that was always, like, normal. And there are many Christians in Damascus till this day. It was always like a thriving,
Sure.
it was a first majority population, then became a thriving minority population. But that wasn't my context, right? I'd only seen the headscarf. So that was like immediately like, oh my God, this place is very, very different. And then I'm one of the only 2 brown kids
Sure.
in the school, which is weird because Orlando's like, my high school experience is the exact opposite. So after that, middle school and high school, my entire environment was Black and Latino.
Okay.
Like that was, who I grew up around. And so it was public school pretty much throughout. And by 9th grade, maybe the most formative moment was I was a good student until then. I think the pressures of high school and then this is post 9/11 America. So there's post 9/11 culture. I'm already kind of an outcast.
Right.
And high school.
And now you fit the part of what,
Exactly.
yeah.
What years? So walk me through kind of do the math for me here.
2001.
Yeah, that's.
I mean,
I have no idea.
Yeah.
I know 2001.
Yeah.
Beyond that.
But I'm thinking about
Yeah.
like the time frame that you're talking about, middle school, high school. When did you graduate high school?
Yeah, so I didn't graduate high school.
Okay.
I started. So I think if I had to put a time frame, it was 2007 or 6 or 7.
Yep.
When I was in 9th grade, maybe a little bit before then. That was 9th grade, and a little bit of 10th grade was just all about cultural survival. How can I be the coolest kid?
That's right.
Which clique do I join?
Yep.
And
You want to rebel to be accepted as well?
Yeah, there was a rebellion, but I don't think it was informed by me being the imam's son, personally. Because you asked about, my experience as being the son of an imam. My father was just really, really busy.
Yeah.
The Muslim community, the immigrant Muslim community in America, the institutions and the mosques are still fairly new. Now, Islam has been here since before Columbus.
Sure.
And then the black, 30% of enslaved Africans, some say 40% in certain areas, were Muslim. So Islam has always had a history in America and in the Americas in general. As you know, there was the National Origins Act, which basically prevented immigration into America unless you were white and European, for 75%. And then that was only repealed in the 60s through the Civil Rights Movement. When that gets repealed, all of these immigrants come to America from all parts of the world, including all parts of the Muslim world, Indonesia, Turkey, Syria. A lot of the immigrants, Lebanese are the exception actually, in Toledo and in certain parts. From 1965 till now, that's not a long time.
Right.
No.
Whereas the Christian community, like the role of the pastor was pretty clear.
Dialed in.
This
right.
is what you did.
Right.
For the role of the imam, there is no clarity till this day. And so as a result, my father was always working.
Right.
That's what I remember. And
This
yeah.
might be an invasive question, and
I love invasive
bear
questions.
with me. How much do you like Gretchen? So, your dad working a ton, and I assume like anyone else wanting to earn
Of course.
his
Yeah.
pride,
Take
and
care of his
acceptance,
family.
right? But are you wanting to connect with him? Fall back on your mom to make some clarity as to where you should go or who you should be, or you sort of found your path to find a connection with your dad?
I'm really glad you asked. I was very close to my mom.
Yeah.
More close to my mom than my father growing up.
Yeah.
A lot closer to my mom than my father. I think if I had to merge so I'm in high school now, I'm in 9th grade. It's all about survival. School, I lose interest in school. I'm going to a predominantly Black and Latino school, so you can imagine race dynamics were not so different in Orlando, a lot less funded, education is not as strong. teachers are the most sincere.
Sure.
Till this day, I believe that. But that was the reality. And so there's the rebellion. Like, I
Right.
want to be cool. I want to what have you. And I'm not seeing my father as maybe now in hindsight, I would have liked to see my father. And it wasn't his fault because he has to
I understand.
work excessively. So naturally, I became very close to my mom, and she worked full time as well. So she worked full time, but the role was different. She was a teacher. So she can come back from, teaching, and then after 3, she
Yeah,
was in the
similar
home.
schedule to the kids.
Exactly.
What did she teach?
She taught Arabic.
Okay.
She taught Arabic and
Sure.
Islamic studies to young kids,
Okay.
elementary kids. Whereas my father, he's the spiritual leader of the community. You don't really, especially with these new institutions that are now being built by the Muslim community, we don't know what that role is. He has to lead
There's no
prayers
working
5 times
hours.
a day.
That's right.
Yeah, the working hours are all over the.
Right.
And the crazy part is, in addition to being an imam, he also taught at the school.
And I don't want to, although I am surprised at how many people do listen to our show,
Yeah.
I don't want to take it for granted anyone listening has an understanding of
Sure.
the practice of your faith.
Sure.
So can you talk a little bit what the daily exercise
Sure.
respectfully looks like? So when we're talking about leading this, it isn't, and I don't know more about Christianity or Catholicism necessarily, but their big day is Sunday, I think. But that isn't
That's right.
actually.
Or Saturday after 5 o'clock.
So
That's also fine because
But
that's
also, like,
But talk to me a bit about what your dad's schedule looks like, building a community, but really on a transactional basis. This is what a day looks like for an imam.
Yeah. So, again, it's still in America. That's still being defined. My PhD is on this,
Yeah.
like on community in Muslim America, because I realized there's just not much data and there's not much defined metrics. But I'll tell you from his perspective, or his reality, and many others till this day
Please.
like him. We have 5 daily prayers, and they're all spread out through the day. You have an early morning prayer. It's a dawn prayer. Then you have an afternoon, early afternoon, a late afternoon prayer, a sunset prayer, and then an evening prayer. So you can imagine you're at the mosque 5 times a day
Right.
throughout the whole day. And then because you're a spiritual leader, I'm sure this happens to pastors, people meet you after a service, and they're going to talk to you, and they're going to ask you questions, and they're going to need you to counsel
It's
them.
the flock. They want guidance.
Of course,
Absolutely.
and that comes with the
Yes, sir.
territory. If you can just imagine, those are the 5 daily prayers. He's doing the Friday sermon, so you know how you have Sunday church, we have like Friday mosque. That's the main kind of required moment that people show up to. There's a sermon, there's a prayer. The whole thing's about an hour. After that, people will come. My father will have office hours for counseling. He'll also be teaching full-time at the school.
Right.
So based on what I said, you can already imagine morning all the way to
weddings,
evening.
funerals, visiting
Weddings,
families,
exactly.
helping people out, all that kind of thing, visiting the sick,
Yes.
all of that.
Now, I admire deeply the Christian American approach to a lot of the chaplaincy work. That's something that I tried to integrate when I was an imam here, is that I love that the imam, like part of the pastor's job is you go to people's homes and you visit them, right?
Well, not to bring a sad part into it, but one of the in my own life, obviously, I've lost a daughter, and we are not a family of faith, right? So, but this is important to people who I love, and it's important to honor certainly Lucy. And you were out of town, I think, but you were the first person I thought of to handle
Wow.
our family and my friends.
What an honor.
I trust you implicitly in this way. So to your point, I do think, indiscriminate of your particular beliefs, the tenets for what you prescribe to are so important, right? And I think the community building on a one-to-one basis you and I had, you were my very first call. I knew that this needed to be done for the betterment of everyone who was going to be involved in the most regrettable moment of my life.
Right.
And I don't know, other than probably just a general amount of information about your faith, but you are someone who, you're a kind person, your warmth
Thank you.
pours through even your eyes, right? So, and I could see how you could rally a room of people, probably with your ears first and then your mouth, which not to be an indictment of.
He's complimenting all my body parts now.
Just working his way from the top down.
Yeah.
So just
We
wait until
really-
he gets to the
Yeah,
shoulders.
that's
He's,
right.
he's
Oh,
already
the
talked about
shoulders,
his
We
all
are
shoulders, yeah.
really trying to get that Damascus download those
Yeah.
numbers up.
I think it's
Go ahead.
interesting, Matt, that you said that you described yourself as not a faithful person or not a
You're going to not a faithful person, right? I mean,
We'll convert you to Islam by the
you
end
know
of
what
this.
I you know what I
Yeah,
mean.
of course.
So I'm gonna end up. You're gonna make me regret this for the next 6 weeks now.
We're already regretting you talking.
Yeah. Okay. But I think it's interesting, and maybe it's a battle of semantics, right? When people say use the word religious versus faith, right?
Yeah.
And I think that maybe you're not practicing a religion, you're not
That's right.
going to church, but I think to say that you don't have faith in something, right? And I remember when I was in high school, describing to a teacher, and I went to a Jesuit Catholic high
Nice.
school, and I had said I just feel like the religions are like languages, right? Is that they're all sort of saying the same thing, but in very different ways. And so the way you say hello to somebody in Spanish is different than the way you say hello in English. But we're greeting people, right? And we're greeting people with kindness and formality and all of that. And,
Right.
and I feel like, at least for me, what I've studied, what little I've studied in world religions, I think there's so much overlap, and we tend to get more focused on
The differences? Of course.
than on all of the incredible
Agreed.
overlap. To say, at the end of the day, I think we all believe in a greater. I think all the religions agree that there is a greater
Higher power,
being,
greater
a higher
being,
power
certainly.
and that our role on this earth is to be a good person.
That's right.
Right.
Well, and again, and just to close that thought out, I agree with you. But that was, you had built that spirituality. I knew that there was a need for it, and you filled that.
How does may I?
I don't know. There's no way
So
of knowing.
how does
That's the thing.
someone? How would one become an imam or be designated as
I was
such?
going to
Are
ask.
you
Because it was a good
Is it
question. Matt wants to
appointed?
take credit for it.
right? I know. Is
well, I
it
think
appointed?
That just makes sense. He's my guest.
It happens in different faiths in different
Right.
ways.
Yeah, yeah.
Obviously,
So, like,
a
what-
Christian minister can study and say they're that and then develop their own church
Yeah.
and following. Catholic priests are obviously studied and appointed and take vows. Does a mom automatically become responsible for a particular flock of
Right.
people or a particular building?
Yeah.
And
I know there's
how's the
several-
title get associated with
Right.
the person?
No, that's a really great question because you're not just
I was
asking.
just a reminder.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There's two layers to the question of the credentials and then what does the actual role entail. So before I answer that, I actually wanted to respond to your comment about the differences and commonalities because I share a slightly different perspective, and that perspective is that I think we can, as Americans especially, I think we can get into the habit of almost exclusively focusing on commonalities because we're afraid to talk about differences. And I think a lot of our actually challenges in America is because there's almost an implicit subconscious deflection. You're not doing that. And I agreed with everything you said. But I've noticed that growing up in our culture, it's don't talk about race, it'll just go away. And what that does, especially for young people growing up, it shows them that difference is,
Taboo.
Don't talk
taboo.
about it, right.
And so
Yeah.
then you'll have the other extreme, which
That's right.
I think we're witnessing now, which is every difference matters.
Yeah.
And, there's no the idea of personal truths. I'm sure we all grew up with that concept. We come from different contexts, we value things differently. But the idea that everything that is true only depends on whether you said it or not. There's no objective metric of analysis. So that's the other extreme. And for me, it's
Or if you believe it or not.
or if you believe it or
I mean,
not. You personally believe it.
implicit
Exactly.
data,
Yeah.
right, isn't true if you don't choose to believe it, is kind of where we
Yes.
are now.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And careening more so,
Right.
yes.
in my opinion.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
I mean, obviously that's different than faith, but I take your point.
No, but
Yeah.
to your point, I think it's similar in that. So you talked about language, which is essential because when people say I have faith or don't have faith, or have religion or I don't have religion, and in my field now you have the rising popularity of I'm spiritual but not religious.
Yes.
what we don't realize, and I think this is what you're getting at, they're actually all saying very similar things. But because, and this is where my perspective is, because we don't have a culture, or we've maybe lost a culture of saying, okay, no, what do you mean by religion? And okay, that's interesting. Here's what I mean by religion. And let's debate it out. Let's have some civil discourse.
Is there a value? But I'll
get to your question, I promise, because it's an excellent question.
I'm sorry, let's go back to Gretchen's dumb question.
No.
Your guest said it was a good question.
Yeah, he did.
Which means that whether or not you believe
And
it was
he's
a
a
good
man of
question,
faith.
it is.
Matt.
Yeah, Matt, you honestly.
Okay, we're not all going to turn on. Yeah. Hang on. That's right.
Matt brought me in thinking I was gonna and I'm like turning against him. Sorry, bro. I still love you
immediately.
I still love you.
Don't worry.
It is amazing how quickly our guests, even the ones that don't know Matt, pick up on the rules of this podcast, which is it's always,
we always
3
turn
against
on
1.
Matt? Okay.
Yeah, sure. It's the binding agent of this entire
Okay, as
program.
a faith leader, then I'll balance it a little bit.
Yeah.
I'll turn on both of you every now and then.
Yeah, if you've ever gone into a bar that has a dartboard on the side, like pretty easily where the target is, and you can find it.
Anyway, that's called a transition.
The process of which someone becomes imam.
Imam, yes. So again, I don't want to overcomplicate it, but in America, so just keep in mind, when it comes to a place like America, this is still being negotiated. This is still being negotiated heavily because at least the immigrant community is a new community. Yeah. In other parts of the world, it's very simple. You go through training. It's usually about 6 years. And then you get designated by the Islamic government to basically take care of a mosque and lead a community at a mosque. And the fundamentals of that role is you're leading prayer, you're doing the Friday sermon, and you're responding to the concerns of your community. In my forthcoming book and in my dissertation, I say, based on my context as an American and based on going back to the drawing board and saying what are the fundamentals of a spiritual leader, I say that they're the first responder on all community matters. That's how I see an imam.
Is in the Islamic world or in the United States, is it described as a calling? As a vocation that you feel compelled to participate in?
This is a really interesting question.
I just said that 5 minutes ago. I don't understand. Is it because you don't know them and you just want to be nice to them?
No, but this one is particularly interesting because I'll tell you, sorry, I still love you, Matt, but
I need it, so.
It's particularly interesting because we do have generally the idea of being divinely inspired. So as a general idea, we have, in fact, I'll go deeper. In Islamic spirituality, we have the idea that you can be inspired through the devil and his minions or those who are so. You can
just pass that right around the horn. Just send it back.
Look, man, as long as it doesn't get to me,
I think you're good.
I tried and it just skipped right over you.
it was like a force field.
Are you smelling sulfur? Please talk to these two idiots.
So this divine inspiration.
Yes.
Is that exclusively for this particular position, or can someone be divinely inspired to be a CPA
and to be a carpenter? Exactly. So this is why it's a very interesting point, because we don't have, in fact, when it comes to spiritual leadership, it's almost flipped, because you don't want the person you don't want the religious leader having any pathway to some narcissism that can, where they consider, I was called to this, I'm specifically chosen, because the spiritual religious leader is supposed to be the opposite of that. In fact, leadership in general in the Muslim tradition is not that which is sought, is that which is given, and you're kind of like, I don't want to be it. No, you have to be. You're the most qualified. Okay, fine.
How on earth, as a human being, and based on the fact that this is within your own household, and people are coming to you for this guidance, right? How often are you looking in the proverbial mirror to make sure that you are not falling into...
every day.
I would think.
I have to.
Because people are coming to you for this,
of course,
and having your mouth moving and your ears open and your heart open, that there's a lot of conflict there.
Yes.
You are at the core a human being, right? So
Of course.
putting yourself, sort of
Yeah.
keeping yourself in check and saying, am I honoring what you just said? It is, this is a calling, but I am sort of second to this larger group and community. What process do you work through to make sure that you are honoring what you've just said?
Great question.
Yeah.
See, Matt, even you can do it. You can do it.
You can do it, Matt.
Thanks, guys.
You did not say that with a straight face. I just it's a podcast, and I need people
Well,
to
I
know.
don't think it needs to be called out.
No.
I just wanted
Kevin just has
It's all
issues
about
with Matt.
honesty.
Yeah, they all do.
So I'll answer it generally, and then I'll tell you about my personal process. It doesn't mean you can't have a calling to this. Clearly, so you asked about my personal story. Post high school, like I dropped out of high school.
Yeah.
And after dropping out of high school, I moved to California on my own as a 15-year-old in Glendale, Los Angeles.
Oh my gosh.
And because my father shipped me to his friend that was living there, because he heard you could just skip high school. So after dropping out, I took the California high school proficiency exam, and I skipped high school.
It's strange to me because of all the states that would think they would not care if people were being taught anything, Florida would be number one.
Yes. Well,
My words, not
No,
yours.
that just depends on what they want to teach
now
you.
I have to defend Florida, and I'll
for
tell you
God's
why.
sake.
Because
Yeah.
when I come back, I'm only 15.
Yeah.
I joined Valencia Community College. I got so lucky that was the number one community college in the country at the time. So it was a beautiful pathway into university. At community college, I discovered, oh, no, I don't hate school. I was just in survival mode this whole time.
Right.
And now I can be treated as an adult. So I did community college. I was pre-med when I entered into university. Existential crisis to the max, because you asked me about like my journey and journey into faith and my rebellious nature. I didn't really have a rebellious, like, burn the house down type nature, but I did have a profound existential crisis since I was like 13.
Yeah.
And in university, it hit its peak. So now I'm like, I can't even think about being a physician.
Right.
And my father and mother weren't pushing me in those directions, but like we're Syrian. If you know anything about Syrians in America, I'll tell you, we're either physicians or wildly successful businessmen. There's rarely a gradient.
Yeah.
So long story short, during that existential crisis, discovering what I want, being completely consumed by the big questions. What is true? What is not true? This is why I brought up differences, because for me, like, that's all I cared about. What is the fault line of truth? I don't want to just operate on the basis of my whims. Through that journey, not only could I not consider medicine seriously, even though I did all prerequisites, I graduated at 19, so I was like trying to finish, but I also, being an imam was like the last thing I could think of, because I also saw the challenges of my father.
Certainly.
I saw organizational dysfunction.
Yeah.
When this is the whole pastor's child being a rebel. If you're not children of pastors, maybe I'll give you a dimension that doesn't get spoken about often, which is they're seeing the good, the bad, the ugly, and the very ugly. They're seeing their parents being honored and maybe overpraised, but they're also seeing them being humiliated.
Humans.
They're seeing the humanity of the organizational
And treated
structures.
badly by people and
Treated
all that.
badly by
Yeah,
people.
sure.
You're taking my, my father away. He can't even prioritize. Those are the things going on in our mind. And so it's almost like a beautiful pathway, a natural pathway to rebellion. So given that that's kind of my journey, yes, I felt after I went abroad, after college, I worked as youth coordinator for a year. And this will give context to the intentionality question. I'll do it quickly. Moved to Flint, Michigan. Super random. Florida to,
That tracks.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
There's a direct flight
Yeah.
One
from
way.
Flint to Orlando.
Yeah. It was. I had a great time. I actually love the people of Flint. It was just cold and snow. Like, it was an environment I was not used to.
It's a tough town.
It was a tough town.
Yeah.
After doing that, the conclusion I came to was, I am like barely 20. How am I counseling young people?
Yeah.
Like, I haven't even resolved my existential crisis. That's when I went abroad to study Islam. And again, it wasn't so I can become an imam.
Sure.
It was, I need to resolve this crisis.
Find yourself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Find myself.
But I would think that there is something honest about constantly being in crisis and leaning on your faith, right?
That's the story of my life.
Right. And I think and that's one of the reasons why, I mean, we talk about these things. We can edit out anything that you're not comfortable with, but one of the things that makes you who you are to me is that you are very open about the fact that you are in crisis. You can't be, your parents can't be on this pedestal when you're growing up as a kid, and then you start making mistakes, and you're like, oh my God, they never made any mistakes.
Right.
So the leader of a community in the same way, saying, I'm at odds all the time.
Yes.
I'm in crisis constantly.
It's just honest. I mean,
that's
everyone
right.
knows
and
that's what
makes
the real
you,
experience is.
and that's what makes you who you are to me.
And
So
guess who you think I learned that from?
Your mom.
My father.
Really? All right.
My mom had this, of course, but because my father was the spiritual leader, my father didn't fall into the typical archetype of, like, how do I say this? Like, I don't mean this in a negative way, but there's a performativity that we all recognize to this role of religious leader.
Absolutely.
My father didn't have any of that.
Yeah.
He didn't care about it at all. If you lose respect for me because I'm humble, go somewhere else.
Sure.
That was I knew that was in the back of his mind.
Yeah.
So he was always humble. He was talking about his devotion. And whenever he gave sermons even, he would do it in the first person. I need to work on this. And so I naturally developed that idea that
but
it's okay.
To your point, though, that is not, at least this might be an unfair generalization, that has not been my experience. Indiscriminate of the faith specifically. So that.
Yeah, I think across all of them, right? I mean, I'm thinking about, there's a Catholic priest here in town that, certainly was disruptive.
Yeah.
But his delivery, I mean, I do broadcast for a good chunk of my career, and I say, like, he is one of the most boring individuals to listen to. Like, the delivery is just painful. And then I met Gretchen.
Right.
But the delivery is so painful, but the message was so authentic.
Yes.
And I use the first person quite often, and we talk about, and I think that's, at the end of the day, we're building relationships, right? And I think to build trust, it requires authenticity.
And I think that
and I think it's interesting as you talk about that, that battle against narcissism.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right? Like, for me, at a far lesser level.
And you're losing that battle.
At 100%. Oh, no, look, when I
this
leave,
is not going to be an hour long. I know this is way too fun. We're going to keep going.
But, like, when I leave, a basketball game that I announced, I'm walking out.
You're the man.
Yeah, my chest is a little bit.
That's why.
So I'm announcing a basketball game that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Right, in the grand scheme of life, the work you're doing matters at a very different level.
And people need it.
And so to see someone and be like, yep, I know what I did for that person, right? Yep. That's why, like, I don't know that I could be a doctor, right? To be like, oh, I saved that person's life.
Yeah.
I saved that person's life.
Well, that's not the
You're
one
welcome.
I mean, that's not
the only reason.
Yeah. Math and science also are sort of.
But
those are restrictive.
It's like there's a. The challenge is that there's also a balance that is almost impossible to strike, because you have to be authentic for people to connect. But at the same time, there's a level of distance that's required for them to actually benefit. Yeah. So when I
Can you talk through that just a little bit?
I have a great story. I mean,
we'll tell you
great
if it's
to me. Yeah. I already
we'll
did that before you even.
Like
I
that
just
last joke you said
right
that was hilarious. I was like, man.
No, I don't even have any jokes.
We're still waiting.
We're gonna hear that one.
Yeah.
There's a knock-knock joke that's just gonna knock it out of the park.
No, I only have profound insight. No, I'm joking.
Yeah. Back to that humbleness.
Back to the narcissism. Yeah, exactly. Back to the humbleness. Do you know how humble I am?
I'm the most humble person.
I'm the most humble.
Here's
you have
5
no idea.
reasons. Here's 5 reasons why I'm the most humble person you'll ever meet.
They're all my pictures.
Yeah.
We used to have a joke in college where we wanted to create hoodies that said, "I am more humble than you are."
Yeah, sure.
Just to,
Oh, that's good.
But when I first moved to Toledo, I met Rabbi Wiseman. He's since retired, and it was like an interfaith event with the it was like Muslim and Jewish, the Jewish Council, and it was just an interfaith event. I wasn't expected to speak. I was just kind of there, and God bless him. He kind of like, we struck a conversation, but he gave me some advice, and he said, "Hey, I could tell you're new to this, and he said, as religious leaders, pastors, rabbis, imams, we are paid to cultivate community, and by nature excluded from it. And it was it was the
Yeah.
first time that someone actually spoke
Right.
to what I've been feeling my whole
Right.
career, which is there is a level of distance that's
Right.
required. And if you don't know that balance, what you'll end up doing is kind of like what we talked about, where you're that becomes a conduit to narcissism because
Yeah.
you're just talking about yourself as authentic as
Right.
you are.
But it's also
and
unhealthy for everyone.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. But
yeah.
you know, when is it healthy?
That
and
boundary,
when is it?
I mean,
That boundary has to be struck.
And we had talked about this. I can't remember who the guest was, but we had talked about setting boundaries and how to honor that. And it's such a give and take, right? I do want to back up just a second. To become an imam, there's certainly the path of things that you have to sort of, or boxes you have to check.
Yeah,
Forgive
yeah,
me
yeah.
If that's
Yeah.
not as crude, but were any one of those more challenging for you in particular? Like, are you a natural public speaker? Being able to take the Quran and transform it into an audience. Which one of those things was the hardest for you to
These are great questions.
and the one-on-one,
That's a tough
where
one.
you're like, this is, you can't be great at everything, right? And you
course.
appear to be great at nothing. So
Yeah.
just rank them
Thank
for
you.
us, for God. Yeah. Rank them for us, for
I'm
God's
honored.
sake.
From the bottom up. Let's go. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do have nice eyes though,
Yeah,
apparently.
yeah, right? Or like, he's like a
That's
dreamboat.
great.
They're dreaming.
You know?
They're
Yeah,
dreaming.
yeah.
They're dreaming. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So
We build you up to tear you down.
good. Yeah, that's part of the spiritual process. When I moved to Cape Town, South Africa, which is where I did my formal seminary training, which may surprise a lot of people. They think I went to like Saudi or something. My father's like, no, you're not, because a lot of the Islam of Saudi Arabia was a post-colonial reformist movement, and so it didn't represent like the stuff that you maybe have heard about in history, the Andalusian Jews, Muslims, and Christians, kind of like that diversity. So I went to Cape Town, and Cape Town has a history of like 400 years of Islam. They were brought originally as
Really?
Yeah, they enslaved.
I was saying, 'cause
From
when I think colonialism,
the Dutch.
yeah, okay.
Dutch took a bunch of scholars and kings and princes and from the Malay archipelago, and so they have a very, very established tradition. And what I struggled most with, if I'm honest, was I am an overthinker. The just analytical side of things is challenging to me.
Sure.
And so theology was the most difficult subject. And by theology, I mean like the rational proving God's existence. How do I, why? Because in college, the new atheist movement was at its peak. And I, in my existential crisis, was a lot more of an atheist.
Sure.
Mentally, intellectually, than I was a person of faith. I still prayed, but in my mind, I was negotiating every kind of
That's fascinating
critique
to me. Yeah,
and
of
doubt,
course. Right.
So as a result, that was the most interesting, but also the most challenging. Other things, and if I'm honest, I picked up from my father, like
Okay.
public speaking.
Okay.
Actually, I owe a lot of my public speaking to a white American convert to Islam who became the most famous Muslim on the planet for many decades. His name is Hamza Yusuf, or Mark Hansen, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf. And so in my existential crisis, I discovered him at like 17, and I would just memorize all of his
This is your
speeches.
beacon. Yeah,
Exactly.
okay.
He also gave me hope because I was on my way
Yeah.
out of Islam.
Okay.
And here's the smartest and most intelligent human being I've ever seen in my life in college, giving me answers to everything.
Yeah.
And negotiating that. So public speaking came more natural. Translating the Quran into like applicable wisdom
Absolutely.
was something that came natural because I'm a pragmatist.
Okay.
So I love theory, but I also, as I'm thinking through theory, immediately I'm thinking, how do I
So your mom's
give this?
your mom's teaching, that's also calling, right? So
Of course.
this has to translate in some way, right?
Right.
The being able to consume it is one thing, but being able to translate it to multiple audiences, right? And this isn't just
Yeah.
a sermon or a comparative
Yeah.
to a large group. You then have to translate it or probably talk about it on a one-on-one basis. I mean, that has to be channeling something that your mom or that teaching it in a way that whomever the audience is, individual others, has got to be something that is
My rule
constant.
is translate to self. Like if I don't connect, I'm not going to say it. That's like my golden rule.
Yeah.
If I can't connect to this message, this sermon,
Yeah.
this speech,
Interesting.
I would rather not give the sermon.
Do you revisit it ever to make sure that the Ahmed that was looking at before is still the same one?
It's never the same one.
Yeah, right. I bet.
I'm always, that's the beauty of scripture.
Yeah.
Is there's all of these
You can feel bad all the time.
Yeah. I don't know what
Any number
scripture
of
you're
ways.
reading, Matt. You know,
That's right.
We got to convert you to Islam, man. I
Yeah,
need to
sure.
give
That's what
you.
I thought the show was about.
Your path to healing is through Islam. I promise.
You need several paths.
Yeah, you
More
How
need.
long you got, brother?
You need more than one
I got time.
It's a long, lonely path.
Speaking of, you know,
So's his.
existential crisis, and
Yeah, sure.
personal crisis, certainly we're in the midst of a humanitarian crisis.
Yeah.
If you don't mind talking a little bit about that.
He doesn't have an opinion about that at all.
How
No
do
opinions.
how do, certainly people in your faith community are hurting. I mean, there's just so much devastation that has happened. How are you responding to that? What are people telling you? What is...
How do you not burn everything down?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. Thankfully, that's not, that's never been in my nature.
That has to be hard.
I have fire. I mean, we all do. We have a burning fire inside, and it comes out in different contexts. But because of the way I watched my father operate, kind of balanced wisdom, it didn't matter who you were. It didn't matter if you were just flooded with tattoos, which is a taboo in some religious communities. You talk to him, he'll talk to you exactly the same way. It didn't matter if you're Muslim, you're not Muslim. He'll talk to you with complete love and respect. So that wisdom was always there. But I think, to answer your question more directly, there are two levels to the crisis. The first level is this humanitarian crisis, genocide, as it is labeled by genocide experts. Undeniable. And witnessing that creates within us that are not there a level of survivor's guilt, right? Which is like, how do I crack jokes on a podcast while there are millions of people driven to famine by our tax dollars. Like, how do we even do that? So that's one level. But I think the most painful level for us as Americans is the crisis of trust in our institutions. Being able to witness the president of the most powerful country on the planet that we love, this country that we love, that we want to see in the best and most beautiful form, to live up to its ideals. The moment something happens, we'll peddle unverified lies, which will motivate Islamophobic attacks, like that 6-year-old that was stabbed like 40 times in Chicago. We're seeing constant spinning of truth by what we deem to be reputable news outlets. The New York Times, you heard all of these rape allegations about Hamas were completely false. And not only false, the one that peddled them was part of the IDF, had no journalistic actual expertise, and yet this became normative. And I think what's happening, a lot of Americans are reacting in one of two ways. The pain is so intense, so they're doubling down. Like, one segment is just like, no, we're gonna double down. This is, our institutions are fine. It's all about Hamas. But there's and I believe this is the majority of sincere individuals that are internalizing this and saying, oh my God, we're re-invoking the very ghosts that have been haunting our country for centuries, and they're being invoked in this conflict. They're being, we're seeing,
on our watch.
On our watch.
I don't even think that you mentioned some of these false narratives, of course, and officials bending over backwards to, say the right thing and not, I'm not even sure the majority of Americans care about that stuff. I mean, you know what I mean?
Right,
because they don't just fundamentally agree that it should be happening at all, regardless of any of these other specific supposed acts that happen. I had the tremendous opportunity to travel to Gaza a number of years ago.
Oh, no way.
Yes. And so I don't want to say I'm obsessed because that seems to trivialize the story, but having seen the area.
Having been.
Yeah.
And knowing
Yeah.
the size of it
Yeah.
and the way that people are forced to live there
Yep.
before this happened.
Yep.
It's just devastating every single day to see what's happening. So what would you tell sympathetic Americans, concerned Americans, people that want to do something and feel like there's nothing that they can do?
Honestly, the best thing that we can do in a moment like this is arm ourselves with facts and education. I think a lot of what's driving the horror is our reactionary reliance on whatever mainstream media may say. And I'm not like, please don't get me wrong, I'm not like the everything mainstream media says is false. Like I don't have that, I guess.
Makes you wonder though.
Sure.
But with certain things, yes, that is a safe assumption to have. Like on Gaza, on the Palestine issue, that is a safe assumption to have. And I think the American public needs to understand that there's two ways you can go. One way is, you know what? I don't want to think about the history. Let's just look at the moment in time, okay? And okay, if we just look at what's happening now, is it normal for 12,000 children to have been massacred? One of my friends, he's a Bay Area physician who left to Gaza to help, to provide assistance. Just yesterday, he pulled out a bullet like this big, and he said, this child was asleep in his tent when a drone, who do you think makes these weapons? Our country, fired at him, and it barely missed his heart. So, even if we just look at the moment, we see that what is happening is profoundly evil, and we cannot stand for this. But then let's say, which is very fair, an American might say, like, look, there's context to this. Let's look at the history. Even if you take that path, you can't start at October 7th.
No.
You have to go all the way back to the colonial history that begins actually before 1948, when the British colonized Palestine, and the British mandate gives it to Zionists who are coming and being welcomed by the Palestinians. So either way you slice it, right? This is something that we should not support. And in responding to this, I believe in long-term change. And so as a result, I really think the priority is for Americans to educate themselves and, as a practical step, simply do everything in our power to say, there is a better use for our tax dollars. We don't have to use them to kill children and to fund wars when we have a mental health crisis, when we have people who are homeless in the wealthiest state. We have all of these issues, and yet you want to send billions of dollars abroad, whether it's complicated or not. And I don't believe it's complicated. But even if we said it's complicated.
Right, even if you agree.
Right?
Right.
Do you know what I find fascinating is that, it's complicated. Okay, but that's the exact thing you're saying about homelessness to not actually solve the problem.
Right.
But now you're saying it's complicated, so we send them billions of dollars. So anyway, I don't want to digress. I think that the bottom line, we have to educate ourselves on the history. Why is America invested? Why is America giving billions of dollars to Ukraine, who is being colonized and invaded? And yet when it comes to Palestine and Israel, they're giving billions of dollars to the colonizer. So why the double standard? And this is what I said about crisis of trust. I think that's the greatest crisis Americans are facing, is that they're feeling, I don't know if I can trust anything anymore.
Right.
Where do I begin?
Yeah. So where do you begin? When I was in college, I graduated college in 2003, and so I remember taking. That's right.
So that's adorable.
But I remember, I took a media class, and my professor was from Spain, and so we went back and watched, and would in real time, he'd say, "Hey, check out this newscast from Spain." Yeah. And we'd watch the newscast from America, and the stories, the post 9/11 war on terror stories, were so wildly different coming on Spanish television versus American television.
Take that all the way through, though. Make sure that
that's an excellent point.
Well, you bring it to today, right? Sure. Is that you've got far left-leaning media outlets and far right-leaning media outlets.
To your point,
and there is no middle.
Before there are two polar. Almost everything is one end of the spectrum or the other. There is no gray or middle or conversation.
Yeah. Except on Israel and Palestine, they're all unified. But keep going.
And the easiest place to get media is on our phones, right, and it's just delivered, but actually knowing and checking the source and all of that is just so challenging. So where can people turn to find truth? Because I think you've got a unique opportunity in that you've got a friend in California that is there that can give you firsthand reports. I don't have that.
Of course.
So,
Friends.
I don't have friends. Thank you. So, but like, where
But you do
does
have
that?
an amazing podcast voice.
Well, thank you.
That hopefully compensates for
Let me tell you what,
that
man.
compensates for your
loneliness.
no friends.
There goes my hope to not be narcissistic today.
Just
Let me
answer
tell
this
you how
dumb question, please.
Yeah,
But where like, how do you actually in 2024 in this chaotic information?
detritus.
Yeah, how do you find the truth?
So, this is a very difficult question to answer. And I think the only way to kind of walk through it is through COVID. How did we sift through truth during COVID?
Not well.
Did we?
We didn't.
No, we
well.
did.
Yeah,
Not
right.
well.
Yeah,
No,
thank
you
goodness.
participated. I was working for the
Yes, I
response
remember.
team and
Yeah.
participated many times with multi-faith leaders to get the message out.
Yes.
We communicated in Arabic and English
Right.
and Spanish and tried to communicate to as many different people we can as a single reliable
Right.
source of information. And
Through
so
trusted
certainly
leaders. Yeah.
through trusted leaders. I mean, and certainly that helped.
But there
I
was
think.
a crisis of trust about whether we can believe
Yes, that's right.
But
what
even
the media
that,
is saying.
that's
right?
correct, yes.
And so, that is exactly what's happening here. The media has spun this to make it so complex and so two-sided when it's not. Like, there's not much gray. There's a colonizer, and then there's the occupied peoples. And I'm sure the citizens of both want peace.
Yes.
They do.
Okay,
Yes.
but
I believe you.
But in the same way that we enslaved Africans as a country, America enslaved Africans. Okay, you don't go to the slave master and say, "How do you think peace should look like?" I mean, it's silly, right? But what I see is irrelevant. Like what I just said.
But we did.
Yeah, exactly.
But we did. I mean, just
We did do that.
Yeah.
But well, that's probably why it took so long and
still ongoing.
ongoing.
Absolutely.
The systemic
It's not a
racism has
mission
not been
accomplished.
resolved.
The banner, I'm sure, went out, but
Yeah. So, like COVID, the only consolation in regards to sifting out truth that I can provide is we have to go back to experts. And then the question becomes, who are the experts? Right? And it's not, now we know, it's not some random journalist on New York Times because they're lying.
Right.
It's not, the experts are, in my opinion, the people who've devoted their entire life to academically studying this. And so if we can get there with people, now I can say, hey, there's this book called The 100 Years' War by Rashid Khalidi. Read that. Now I can say Dr. Norman Finkelstein, who was Jewish, right, who has suffered, his family has suffered in the Holocaust. Here is what, he is the single most written and reputable scholar on Gaza specifically. Here's what he says. But if we don't even have a conversation on who are the experts, and we allow a culture where social media is the only filter of truth, then naturally anything can be blurred. And for me, that is the most terrifying thing about our direction.
Ain't no doubt. So we promised you an hour. We didn't get a chance to talk about your myriad of of other interests, which I think are fascinating.
Yeah, like basketball, man. Like I thought we were just going to talk about basketball this
we
whole
didn't get to talk about your
podcast.
sister, who I know you are incredibly proud of. Both sisters, but the younger one in particular. So, but we've got to close. We promised you an hour. I want to stick to that. You've got a long way to go before your career is ended, but you have to think about this in some way, as we all do. A life well lived, or if you could have your career and life be a success, how would you want it described?
Well, you know what? I'll answer this by answering your intentionality question. The idea of intentionality is arguably the most foundational precept of the entire religion of Islam. That this idea that God, first of all, does not, we have a tradition by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who we consider just the final prophet. We believe in Jesus, Moses, all of them were prophets, right?
Sure.
He says that God does not look at your outward forms, but rather what is within your heart and your actions. Your outward forms, whether you're black, white, it doesn't matter. Now, this lends itself to this very important concept in Islam of intention, and that your actions are judged by God based on intention. So you could do all the right thing. You could be a good person in the world, but you could be motivated to be good by evil intentions, and that is what God is going to hold you accountable for. Now, what is fascinating, I'll bring my psychology hat now on.
Sure.
there are two documentaries that are really cool that study happiness. One is called Happy. I think it might be still on Netflix. The other one, I believe, is called Blue Zones, if I'm not mistaken. And in the documentary on Happy, they went and they surveyed like the longest living people on the planet and what contributed to that, and the happiest people on the planet. And the neuropsychologists that they brought in to kind of unpack that data, they said 50% of people's happiness levels is related to that which they can't control. Okay, so I was born in Damascus. I'm a Syrian that, now lives in America. Fun fact, my great-grandmother was actually from America.
Really?
Yeah. I was going to mention that. She actually moved to Damascus to study Arabic as an 18-year-old, 19-year-old. And then she converts to Islam and marries my great-grandfather. Yeah. So anyway, 50%, I had no control over my great-grandmother. Like, I don't, right?
Sure.
And in Islam, the way we approach that is by having a conception of God as being the all-merciful. Like, if God has put you in a particular divinely ordained circumstance, that's the best thing he can do because God is the most merciful. He wants what's best for you. They said, check this out, 10% is related to what we think our happiness levels are mostly impacted by, which is like our socioeconomic status. They found no correlation between those who made like 50,000 and 50 million, right? So long as their fundamental needs were met. Now, they said 40%, and this is the primary contributor to whether people are happy or not. They called this intentional activity. They said the happiest people on the planet, the most fulfilled people on the planet, are people who wake up every day and they know why they're about to do what they're about to do, regardless of what that is. And for me, I would like to look back at my career, not necessarily with, trophies and trophies of actual successful results, because those are in God's hands anyway. What I want to know at the age of 60, 70, 80, looking back, if I get that far, I want to know, were you sincere in the intentionality? Were you motivated by purpose? Were you motivated by sincere purpose? Or were you motivated by narcissistic tendencies and egoic impulses?
Why'd you point at me?
No.
It's natural.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we conclude here. So I'm so sorry.
That is
I'm gonna
very,
mute your
very,
mic.
very interesting.
Brother, I love you. Thank you
You're
for
just
the time.
so engaging. I was just looking at you the whole time.
Can I ask about your hat?
Yeah, sure.
So tell me what it says on the front and what it means on the back.
Well, mainly it's to hide my hair, but it says MashaAllah. MashaAllah.
That's what I thought it said.
Yeah, I know, Matt. That's why I didn't even address this to you. I'm looking at Kevin. MashaAllah means, and whatever God wills. And colloquially, it's used as you just got married? MashaAllah. Like, God has willed it. That's a beautiful thing that God has willed, right? Yeah. Oh, you just had a child? MashaAllah. It's a way of saying congratulations, while at the same time being intentional about who's doing all of this, which is God.
That is beautiful.
Yeah.
Again, man, thank you so much for the time. I love you. I love seeing you. We've been trying to connect for some time, so thanks for sneaking up here. And thank you for Kevin and Gretchen. I know we had to weasel this into your busy calendars, but I hope you found it certainly worth it.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. The 419 is sponsored by Wetro Wealth Management. Contact Tim Wetro and his team at wetroadvisors.com.